"I'd prefer a bullet over spending life in prison." These words were spoken by Marco Ebben to his confidant just a few weeks before his violent death occurred in Mexico. The son of the drug boss Henk Ebben received exactly what he had predicted. But was his death truly unavoidable, or was it a well-planned disappearance? In this documentary, we delve into all the possible scenarios surrounding the mysterious death of one of Holland's most infamous fugitives, including the theory that Marco Ebben faked his own death. What is it like to grow up as the son of one of Rotterdam's most notorious criminals? For Marco Ebben, this wasn't a theoretical question, but the stark reality of his life. Born on March 31, 1992, he entered a world where the line between right and wrong was already blurred. At that time, his father, Henk Ebben, was establishing a criminal empire that spanned from Rotterdam throughout the Dutch underworld. Little Marco would never know a normal childhood. Instead, a legacy of violence, crime, and a path that would almost inevitably lead him toward his own demise awaited him. His father's shadow hung like a dark cloud over Marco's young life. Henk Ebben had built himself a reputation in the Rotterdam underworld that earned him the nickname the Rotterdam Holleder, a reference to the notorious Amsterdam criminal who was active during the same period. This comparison was not arbitrary. Henk's involvement in multiple liquidations in the 1990s confirmed his position as a ruthless player on the criminal circuit. The murder of truck driver Cheese Pruisen was one of the cases that would eventually catch up with him. When in May 1994, Pruisen's body was found under concrete near the Feyenoord Stadium, led the trail directly to Henk Ebben. The punishment was corresponding, 18 years behind bars. For young Marco, however, his father's imprisonment did not mean a break with the criminal milieu. On the contrary, it was only a confirmation of the world he grew up in. With the Ebben family, kitchen table conversations were not innocent discussions about school or hobbies. Here they were about poker, violence, and the unwritten rules of the underworld. While other children grew up with fairy tales, Marco was taught in a world where respect was enforced with fists and firearms. It is little surprise, then, that Marco developed an early fascination with guns. What might have remained a fantasy with other boys became the precursor to a criminal career with him. His physical development played to his advantage. Growing to nearly 2 meters tall with an imposing build, he quickly became an intimidating figure. On the streets of Rotterdam, people knew, "You don't mock Marco Ebben." What set Marco apart from many of his contemporaries on the criminal circuit was his remarkably disciplined lifestyle. While engaged in the narcotics trade, he himself remained completely clean. No alcohol, no drugs, no cigarettes. This strict discipline extended to his love for sports and poker, where he applied the same intense focus and meticulous calculation that would later benefit him in the underworld. It might have been this very self-control that enabled him to overlook the cautionary tales of his father's prison sentences. While most people would be deterred by the thought of years behind bars, Marco instead viewed it as an unavoidable risk of the lifestyle he had chosen. The tales surrounding his father's wrongdoings and eventual imprisonment were perceived not as cautionary tales, but rather as a guidebook, a blueprint for the kind of life that he was destined to follow. When Marco reached the age of 21, he made the ultimate shift towards a life of crime. It was during this time that he first found himself under the scrutiny of the law due to his participation in a fatal event. Although the specifics remain unclear, the consequences were absolutely undeniable. Marco Ebben had officially walked in his father's footsteps. It was a choice that would seal his fate, although at the time no one could guess how short his criminal career would ultimately be. In the years that followed, Marco quickly climbed the ranks of the Rotterdam underworld. His family name opened doors, but it was his own coolness that helped him advance. Behind his reserved facade was a calculating mind that allowed him to take ever greater risks, and committing increasingly serious crimes. The ticking clock of his life began to run faster and faster. The crucial turning point came in 2013, when Marco was first suspected of murder. This was no longer a minor offense, not an offense that could be dismissed with a fine or a short prison sentence. This was a capital crime that could put him behind bars for decades. The murder of Pepijn van der Velden thrust him and his father into the spotlight of a major police investigation. It was a case that would forever alter his life and draw him even nearer to his ultimate destiny. That February day in 2013 was not only marked by Valentine's cards and roses, but also by a chilling discovery that would send shivers through all of Rotterdam. An ordinary walker made a grim discovery that morning on the Albas, a daihatsu containing the lifeless body of a man. What this hiker did not know was that he had just stumbled upon the victim of a reckoning that would lead directly to one of the city's most notorious criminal families. The victim was 32-year-old Pepijn van der Velden. His body, riddled with multiple bullets, told the story of a violent end. Police quickly arrived at the scene and immediately began an investigation into what was clearly a liquidation. What no one could have suspected at the time, this murder would leave a trail of clues leading directly to Marco Ebben. 2 months earlier, Pepijn had sealed his fate during a failed smuggling operation. In December 2012, Marco gave him the seemingly simple task of moving a truck full of illegal vodka. However, what should have resulted in a quick, lucrative job went completely awry. Due to clumsiness and inexperience, Pepijn damaged a home while maneuvering the truck. The police arrived on the scene, drew up a police report and confiscated the precious cargo, a financial disaster for the Ebben family. Pepijn was not a seasoned criminal, but an ordinary man who was sinking deeper and deeper into Rotterdam's underworld. His cooperation with the Ebben family had made him financially dependent, and the failed vodka operation had put him in an impossible position. With creditors pressing on all sides, he was in a desperate situation from which no escape seemed possible. 2 months after Pepijn's body was found, on April 16, 2013, a heavily armed arrest team raided Marco and Henk Ebben's homes. The police were convinced they had built a strong case against the criminal father-son duo. Marco was lifted from his bed and taken away in handcuffs as detectives meticulously searched his home in search of evidence that could link him to the murder. In the interrogation room, Marco showed a calmness that amazed even the most experienced detectives. Facing serious accusations of involvement in murder, he remained completely silent. Like his father Henk, who adopted a similar attitude in another interrogation room, Marco refused to release anything that could be construed as incriminating. No emotion, no outrage, no denial, just an icy silence that drove the detectives to despair. "We have a strong case against you, Marco," one detective tried. "We know you're behind Pepijn's murder. He made a mistake with your vodka, and it cost him his life." Marco merely looked at the detective with a look that revealed nothing, leaned back in his chair and said only, "I have nothing to say about this." Day after day, interrogation after interrogation, Marco and Henk persisted. The frustration among the detective team grew. They were convinced they had the perpetrators, but without confessions or decisive forensic evidence, their case slowly began to crumble. For 2 months, father and son were stuck in pretrial detention, while police desperately tried to strengthen their case. In the end, the investigators had to do the unthinkable: release Marco and Henk Ebben for lack of evidence. On a rainy day in June 2013, they stepped out of the police station as free men, knowing they had won an important fight. Where the police had wanted to put a dent in the Ebben family's image, the exact opposite happened. Their reputation in the underworld grew exponentially. After all, who could defy the police so openly and get away with it? For Marco personally, this victory marked a dangerous development in his criminal career. He drew a lesson that becomes fatal to many in crime: the sense of untouchability. If he could get away with suspected murder, what could stop him? This event marked a dramatic tipping point. Instead of a warning to slow down, he saw it as an encouragement to keep going, considering grander possibilities and embracing greater risks. The very hour when the court made the decision to release Marco marked the moment when his clock started ticking more rapidly toward his inevitable downfall. Following his release, he dove into international drug trafficking with a newfound energy and ambition. The young man who once operated under the shadow of his notorious father had now become a pivotal figure in the Dutch criminal scene. After his release, Marco felt invincible, but the police were quietly preparing for a new game. They set up the chessboard where they could listen to every move, every word, and every whisper right in his own home. How many secret conversations can you have before the walls start listening in on you? With his new status in the underworld, Marco completely left his modest past behind in the year 2014. On the outskirts of Rotterdam, he moved into an opulent villa that reflected his criminal success. For €5,000 a month, always paid in cash in thick envelopes, he enjoyed a lifestyle that could only be financed with illegal income. What Marco did not know, however, was that the seemingly safe walls of his luxurious abode harbored a hidden secret. During Marco's brief detention, the police had seized their opportunity. Detectives had entered his home, and their purpose wasn't to gather evidence, but rather to install something of much greater value: advanced listening devices designed to capture every whispered word. These invisible ears within the walls were set to overhear conversations that were never intended for anyone outside. The technology was about to prove its immense value. In a moment that would later be deemed crucial, the concealed microphones captured a conversation where Henk informed his son about a new, extremely valuable contact. "I have someone in customs," Henk told Marco, unaware that every word was being recorded. That someone was Garrett G., a corrupt customs officer who turned out to be willing to turn a blind eye to drug shipments for the right price. This golden connection enabled Marco and Henk to set up an ambitious smuggling operation that far exceeded their previous activities. Their plan was both ingenious and bold, concealing hundreds of kilos of cocaine within pineapple shipments from Brazil to the Netherlands. The fruit's sweetness was the perfect disguise for the lucrative, yet illegal trade. The audacity of the father and son discussing their criminal activities was astounding. At the kitchen table, where typical family matters are usually discussed, they openly discussed their drug trade. "Those pineapple boxes are full of coke," they sounded without restraint. As they forged plans, the digital evidence against them grew with each conversation. The detectives listening to the recordings could not believe their ears. Marco and Henk talked about drug shipments as if they were an ordinary business transaction. They mentioned names, locations, quantities and amounts without any coding or circumspection. It was as if they thought their status made them invulnerable, when in reality, every word was another nail in their legal coffin. In April 2015, the police finally struck. After months of patient eavesdropping, waiting and gathering evidence, a massive raid ensued. The results were spectacular. 400 kilograms of cocaine was seized, a quantity with a street value of tens of millions of euros. Henk Ebben was arrested in his home, where agents found more than €1 million in cash, piled up in bundles that were the unmistakable evidence of their lucrative but illegal trade. The subsequent court process dragged on until 2017. The police had built a watertight case, thanks largely to many hours of recorded conversations, in which Marco and Henk repeatedly incriminated themselves. The judge had little trouble passing judgment. Marco was sentenced to 6 years in prison for his role in the massive drug smuggling operation. But Marco, always convinced of his own cleverness, decided to appeal the verdict. The Dutch legal system allowed him to await the hearing of this appeal in freedom, a decision that, when looking back, laid the groundwork for his eventual escape from the clutches of Dutch justice. The irony could not be more pronounced. The very release that had initially boosted Marco's criminal self-assurance after the Pepijn case now provided him yet another opportunity to evade his destiny. The man who believed he could outsmart any system proved himself correct by exploiting this particular legal loophole. The legal loophole that enabled Marco's escape was merely the beginning of a complex international manhunt. On the 13th of May, 2020, his feeling of invincibility shifted dramatically into sheer agony. Racing down the A4 at 200 kilometers per hour, he noticed a black BMW persistently trailing him in the rearview mirror. The pursuers were unwavering in their mission: to capture Marco Ebben at all costs. The unthinkable happened when bullets were fired from the BMW with automatic weapons. For the first time in his criminal career, Marco did something he never thought he would do. He called the police. The same authorities he had evaded and misled for years now became his only hope for survival. "I am being chased and shot at with automatic weapons," he reported to the emergency room in a panic. The irony of this moment was incalculable. The fugitive drug lord who risked everything to stay out of the hands of justice now sought protection from the same justice system against an even greater danger. When the police arrived, the BMW had already disappeared. They escorted a visibly shocked Marco home. But even after this life-threatening experience, he refused to press charges or share any information about the chase. His deep distrust of authorities persisted, even when they could have saved his life. After the incident, the criminal intelligence team uncovered information about the attack's potential cause. Marco had reportedly ripped, or stolen, 21 kilos of cocaine from Amsterdam criminals. In the underworld, betrayal is the ultimate sin, and the punishment is often death. For Marco, this incident served as a severe warning that his enemies walked not only in uniform, but also behind the wheel of luxury BMWs. Later that year, the appeal in his case came to an end. Marco was sentenced to 7 years and 7 months in prison. But instead of turning himself in, he chose a life in the shadows. What followed was an international flight across continents, constantly staying one step ahead of the authorities. Dubai, known for its luxury and few extradition treaties, was his initial sanctuary. He then moved to Spain and Italy, mingling with other European criminals. As pressure increased, he escaped further east to Russia and Turkey, moving like a ghost and leaving minimal traces. In November 2023, the search for Marco intensified when he made it onto Europol's most wanted list. His face could now be seen on international police websites, in airports, and at border stations across Europe. The nets were slowly closing around the fugitive drug boss. Despite this intense hunt, Marco still found time to tell his version of the story. In a daring interview with Rijnmond in 2024, he appeared masked with a balaclava while claiming to be in Russia. "They don't need to know what I look like at the moment," he declared, suggesting that his appearance had changed drastically to avoid recognition. The international manhunt took a dramatic turn in July 2024, when Marco became involved in an attempted liquidation in Turkey. Hit by multiple bullets, he was taken to a Turkish hospital, where he stayed for 5 days. However, the Turkish authorities didn't know his real identity, or that he was internationally wanted. This lack of awareness led to a mysterious escape. Despite his injuries, Marco suddenly vanished from the hospital, once again fading into the shadows. After this escape, Marco surfaced in Mexico, where he formed his most dangerous connection yet, the notorious Sinaloa Cartel. In the drug world, Marco's Dutch underworld skills were prized, and he quickly rose in this new, diverse realm. Marco's cartel ties grew when he likely contacted the son of drug lord Ismael El Mayo Zambada. Yet, with these connections, Marco was also thrust into Mexico's violent drug war, a conflict that was even more brutal than anything he had experienced in Europe. What Marco did not realize was that he was at the epicenter of an internal power struggle between the factions of El Mayo and El Chapo. This position, though initially lucrative, ultimately proved fatal. The man who had avoided any authority in Europe would find his end in Mexican drug violence. The Mexican drug violence would indeed be Marco Ebben's downfall, but on a day that would forever be associated with controversy and mystery. What took place on that fateful February 13th in Mexico City defies all logic. 15 bullets, a planned arrest, and a theory so bizarre as to seem almost implausible. The morning of February 13, 2025, began like many others for Marco, in his luxurious safe house in a suburb of Mexico City. Surrounded by 4 security guards who constantly protected him since the earlier liquidation attempt in Turkey, he lived in apparent safety. In his pockets, in addition to his fake identity papers, he carried a counterfeit DEA identification card that allowed him access to areas where normal citizens could not enter. Marco had arranged an appointment for that morning, though the specifics of it remained somewhat unclear. What he was unaware of was that, simultaneously, a specialized anti-crime unit was getting ready to arrest him. They had pinpointed his location and intended to make their move within 15 minutes. Yet, fate had other plans. As Marco made his way through the parking garage towards his car, the unimaginable occurred. The echo of automatic weapons filled the air between the concrete walls as the hitmen launched their attack. 15 bullets tore through his body, bringing him down instantly. The timing was eerily precise, just 15 minutes before the authorities were scheduled to pick him up. The following day, images of his bullet-riddled body spread rapidly across social media. On February 14th, Mexican authorities officially confirmed what these disturbing images had already revealed. Marco Ebben, the man who had evaded international investigators for many years, was now dead. But who was behind this murder? The speculations seemed endless. One theory suggested that individuals close to Marco, worried that he might reveal secrets if captured, had hired hitmen to permanently silence him. The timing of his death, occurring just before his arrest, appeared to support this theory. Another explanation pointed to rival factions within the Sinaloa cartel. Marco's ties to the son of El Mayo possibly made him a target in the ongoing power struggle that took place after El Chapo's arrest years earlier. The professional execution of the murder bore all the hallmarks of a cartel settlement. But there was a third, much more astonishing theory that surfaced. What if Marco Ebben, the renowned master of escape, had actually orchestrated his own demise? This theory gained more credibility due to the fact that earlier, in October 2024, there were rumors about his death that were eventually debunked. Could this be just a repetition of the same strategy, but now executed with more convincing elements? The most startling evidence supporting this theory emerged from an unexpected source: Marco's own lawyer, Jan Hein Kuipers. In a statement that puzzled the Dutch media, Kuipers claimed that Ebben himself had instructed his security guards to shoot him in the back. The motivation? A simple but desperate choice. Marco did not want to spend the rest of his life, an estimated 50 to 60 years, in an American or Mexican prison. The issues piled up. Was this a credible statement or a smokescreen? Why specifically shot in the back? Was it possible that Marco, knowing arrest was inevitable, chose his own version of escape, not by fleeing, but by disappearing into death? The forensic details of the case spoke volumes. 15 bullets suggested a professional liquidation, not a staged death. Yet questions remained about the exact circumstances, especially since Marco's past had shown that he was a master at manipulating situations. The official confirmation of Marco's death by the Dutch Foreign Ministry brought an end to immediate speculation. After previous false alarms about his death, this was the definitive confirmation. Marco Ebben, the fugitive drug boss who had outsmarted international investigative agencies for years, was truly no more. With Marco Ebben's violent chapter ended, the Netherlands is gearing up for a final reckoning with his legacy. As authorities cautiously return his body, his influence lingers in the global drug networks he established. Ebben's downfall represents the high cost of a criminal life, a cautionary tale rooted in the statistics we discussed earlier. What remains is a tangled web of shattered lives and a family ensnared in a legacy of shame. As one detective pointed out, the end was as merciless as his life. Was this fate unavoidable? Or, as we questioned at the start, could this grim story have concluded differently? The answers are found in the choices we make as a society. Please remember to like and subscribe. We look forward to seeing you next time.